process. But I just did want to acknowledge everybody for taking your time to make it today. And also to point out the fact that this is still a public meeting that is posted on Facebook and other forms of media. So just keep that in mind as we're working through this conversation today. The point of today's meeting is Gail, I know you weren't there. Brian, I think this was right before you had come on. I know that myself and I believe Deb and Brian were there as well when we talked about this in the spring, is just to have a couple of working meetings each year to discuss current issues, things that we'd like to improve, or processes that maybe we need to tweak a little bit from our monthly tree committee meetings. I have my notes from the last time we brought this up in the spring, and I think a lot of it was focused around our existing tree committee policy, or the tree ordinance that's listed in the city's ordinances online. I have a copy of it here, and it's just maybe there's been some changes in the city positionally, how with our verbiage, but also some of the, I guess, procedures that are listed in the ordinance, as well as the species that it points to has changed a little bit. So I just kind of wanted to talk about some things that we might want to change. And then I think, short of sending the ordinance out to everyone and everybody revising it their own way, I think that we might try internally to provide some edits and then come together as a committee, present those changes, and see what language we want to tweak or throw out. The times that we find ourselves in, this makes it kind of hard to make these kinds of changes, but nevertheless, it's something that seems like every time that we have a meeting, one of our monthly meetings, there's things that we point to as a committee that we want to change, or better define. And I guess to back up, in order to change this ordinance, we don't necessarily have the ability to make a change and just implement it immediately. This is something that would have to go before City Commission and get approved as a revised ordinance. So just so that you're aware of that.
Would you be able to send us a link to the tree ordinance? That we could, not right in the middle of the meeting maybe, but I'd like to be able to review it and learn more and think about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I can send that to all members. I'll do that right now, actually. I got it pulled up, but
and how does the tree ordinance currently fit in with the, the Imagine Kalamazoo plans? Is that one of the, would that be one of the motivations for revising the tree ordinance, is to make it more consistent with the ongoing mission within Imagine Kalamazoo?
I would say so. I mean, that would be one of several reasons to change that. I don't think that the ordinance as it's written currently is too far from those goals, but if we could do that to better align, or maybe just clarify what is stated previously, in this ordinance to better align with that. It certainly would be another underlying reason to do this. But it's in that out. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. I have it pulled up and just kind of work through a few things that we noted last time. Make sure maybe get some input while we're here, but also one of the things that was recommended last time is to compare our ordinance with other municipalities throughout the country. Another thing that we've kind of briefly talked about is how to either better align or make a distinction between city right-of-way and how trees are managed versus a natural features protection ordinance and how those trees are protected. I've had a little bit of discussion with Jamie McCarthy on that of what we want to do. I think, you know, both the tree ordinance and natural features is kind of there to protect natural resources, obviously. But to completely align ourselves with their policy, I think we do need to draw a distinction in that there are some zones of the city that have further protections than the ones that we're already providing currently. So I think that kind of revolves around what we as a committee require for those requests that come to the city for removals. You know, trying to come up with something that's a little more equitable for the amount of canopy, the amount of investment lost in each of those trees. So that's kind of one of the big tenets to this document. And really that's why, you know, full tree committee contribution is appreciated for this, because these are big decisions that have to be made, and we don't want it to just be made by a couple of us. We want everybody to weigh in and ultimately, you know, make these changes. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. And I'm just going to point out a couple of things. One is the tree committee itself, based on membership, Parks and Rec, Advisory Board, Environmental Concerns Committee, utility companies, and Public Service Department. It's pretty vague on membership or any sort of, you know, length of time that members are members of the committee, or, you know, it's been pretty loosely defined for better or for worse, but maybe we might want to either, one, incorporate more environmental groups in that conversation, different departments here at the city, just trying to not necessarily expand the committee for the sake of expanding it, but think about those key players in the city now, as opposed to when this was written, to see if we need to incorporate others or what adjustments might need to be made. This was another point that we talked about. This species list of prohibited trees I would defer to some of our more professional forestry folks on the committee as to what edits might need to be made to this list, or if it needs to be expanded or shrunk, or what might have changed.
Well, yeah, because you have now the ash trees that potentially die at some big expense if you plant one and then have to take it down. Some of these were picked on fruiting capabilities. Some of them were on seeding, and like the American elm and all that were picked because they were going to die if they were planted, and would be an expense. So it'll need to be revised.
Absolutely. And I guess some of those trees too, if you're talking about, not being able to survive in a curb space, is there a need to maybe further distinguish between what species can't be planted at all in the city versus in a curb space? Because we do have larger tracts of land that are city right away maintained. And then we also have our parks, and I believe parks has their own species list, but maybe some of the plantings that we're doing in property that's owned by the water department, maybe some of these species that would have been prohibited actually can be planted.
A majority of those species on this list are all pests species. The only thing that parks still plants, I believe, they might do some yews, but I think they plant some birches as well. And you can definitely see birches in parks, and we wouldn't put them in the street, but they put them in parks.
Sure.
Well, even the walnuts, Brian. I mean, if you got a park and you've got a limited use area kind of thing, you could still put walnuts in parks. Most of these species, some of the other ones are invasive species or non-native. When I look at this, the attitude has kind of changed on, box elder is a native. It was not encouraged because of box elder beetle, and mulberry was a native, but it wasn't, it was because those mulberries, the birds eat them and you get red stuff all over your cars. So, black cherry, I think the same thing, but I mean, it's like walnut. There's a purpose for it in a park. And I don't know why sassafras was taken off the list. Was put on the list because, as far as I'm concerned, sassafras is a good tree in a parkway or in a park.
Yeah, I would agree with a lot of those things too, especially, a lot of the birches. A river birch survives pretty well in a dry environment. It doesn't have to be necessarily wet. So yeah, I think a lot of these are native trees and they would be good in the right, in the right environment. But I certainly agree with the ones that are invasive, like Ailanthus and a bunch of other ones in here.
Yeah, the black locust.
Yeah.
And I can tell you the reason why birches were kind of discouraged is not that they couldn't grow or not that they weren't beautiful, but they were subjected to abuse by individuals not realizing that the bark peels, and they would start peeling and peeling and peeling the bark and jeopardizing the health of the tree.
Oh, what a shame.
And, so in some ordinances, you're also going to see that they don't want beech trees, the big beech trees, because people tend to like the smooth bark to carve their names and carve stuff in them. So, some of the trees are picked because of the potential abuse that they can have by people just not understanding the tree.
Mm.
Well, and one of the things that I had written down from last time was just to, I guess if there's some absolute cannot plant in the city trees, but more so just using descriptive terms instead of specific species, no fruiting trees, will be allowed in right of way, or, um, you know, must be appropriate to curb space in general. Just that was kind of one of the things that we had talked about doing, rather than some of these species specific lists. I don't, Brian, that I see that Catalpa. We've talked about that before, and the issues that we've seen with that. But I guess I would be very curious to see what members would want to do or scratch or add, if there's species that need to be added to that since this was made.
I mean, I'm cool with this list to some degree. Like I said, this is all streets, as it says up top, abutting any street. And I wouldn't necessarily plant, I mean, the elm stuff, there's a lot of hybrid elms you could plant these days. But everything else would be kind of stuff you wouldn't really want to plant in a street tree setting. Maybe sassafras, but I don't know enough about sassafras, to be honest with you. If I had to add one, and maybe this is overreaching but like silver maples, I don't necessarily think we should be planting any of those anytime soon.
Sure.
Well, Brian, do you have a survey of the city trees and the populations of them? Like, is the city of Kalamazoo like 89% maple?
Yep. So I don't know. I don't that survey is pretty old, but you could probably say it's still pretty high in that percentage.
I mean, because you don't want to discourage maple, because there's hedge maples and Amur maples that are good for under power lines, and there's so limited number of species that can be placed under power lines. But I guess, when you guys are doing planting, or somebody is wanting to do a planting, you might discourage discourage the maples and encourage other things in your planting. But I would hate to put a limit on it in the ordinance, because there's just so many, maples that can be used. I mean, in actuality, box elder and is in the maple family, but it's in here as a
Yep.
non-species. So like, I think what Anthony's talking about is like, poplar species. It says just poplar or aspen. So, it's not saying that you can't put in cottonwood. It's not saying you can't put in some of the other poplar species. The only maple is Acer negunda, which is the box elder. Nobody wants Ailanthus around. They're doing they didn't do all the elms. They said almost discouraging the American winged, the slippery, the rock, the cedar, and the Siberian elm. So your hybrids can still go in. The juglans are just all the walnuts. I mean, it doesn't even say anything about not having hickories, which would be the same thing, having big nuts that would come down and cause damage. But I agree. Like, I don't think I would want any of these trees in a city right away other than the sassafras.
Well, and I think one of the biggest reasons why we even have this list contained in the ordinance is, there's developers that we refer to this list. Any kind of new construction in the city, it's if we, I try to look at that with that in mind. I think a species list is the clearest way to say what we do and don't want in the city. But at the same time, I don't want to miss any trees that should be prohibited, or necessarily exclude any trees that should not be. So it would be great.
Right. I mean, in generalization, if you would have put in non-invasive trees, a lot of the pears, the Calorie pears, the Cleveland pears, all of those pears that are non-native that are flowering that everybody puts in the city right away are becoming a huge invasive species problem. So do you want to stop people from putting them in their small tree that has, is pretty decorative? I mean,
Yeah. Well, I don't inherently have a strong opinion on that. I think that would be something to ask the committee to see, how we feel about that. I do know, seems like every time I talk to somebody about trees in city right of way, they're really pushing for the native species to this area.
It's going to be a hard fight with the pears. It's just people really like them, and I mean, don't get me wrong, they're like my number 2 hated species, just for they fail a lot, and they constantly have problems with included bark. They happen to peel off in any kind of wind, but it's just one of those species that, just like Norway maples, people really love, and I currently do not like, because the maintenance and the value of them does not equal what I think it should be. But it's just one of those species that people really, really like. That it's going to be a hard fight to on there.
yeah. And I mean, you get the same thing with Zelakova too, Brian. They use that as a city tree, and you got to really watch that you don't have the V branching on those, because those are really get hit by ice damage.
They don't handle pruning very well, and they also do not handle salt either.
Yeah. So, yeah, but I'm just saying, like, I don't know what I would change on this list.
Okay, we'll keep working through this, and like I said, we'll come back to it. Spacing, I don't know. I don't know if that has any change. Further up in the document, we describe the definition of small trees, medium trees, and large trees. And that's what falls into spacing requirements. Maybe that's something that we should refer to a little more in our, tree committee planting recommendations for reference. Just having something a little more formal. I think that's pretty well spelled out, and that'll, when we're trying to decide whether somebody has adequate planting space for certain number of plantings, that could certainly dictate that.
Yeah.
Utilities, I know we've had some discussion. The city, you're within 10 feet of a 10-foot requirement, but Consumers has a 6-foot trim, or is that, I have that backwards?
You guys limit us to 6 foot. We trim a minimum of 10 foot
Right.
from the facility.
And I know this conversation happened in the spring, and I guess with my talks with Brian with Consumers was that ultimately, I guess that had been decided that Consumers kind of trumps what our recommendation would be.
It's not Consumers.
Not
it's the-
Consumers,
It's
but
we're already regulated by
Correct.
the state of Michigan. So yeah.
Okay. So, and maybe that being in there the way it is. I'm not sure for the foot recommendations if that needs to change.
For the utilities,
No, just distance from curb and sidewalk here. Small trees, 2 foot, medium trees,
yeah, no, I
3.
think that's an industry standard, just like the footage up at the top. I think
Okay.
those all come from the ISA on planting recommendations. And probably also from the Arbor Day Foundation.
We probably need to revise. I'm sure, I would assume that there's been further reference material since 1988. One of the things that we've talked about were the clearance for city sidewalk and city streets, and how they have a definition of major thoroughfare and 15-foot for all other streets. I personally would like to try to just stick to 16 feet in general. To not leave that ambiguity of 15 or 16 feet, I just would push for 16 feet total. I don't know if there's any kind of, I'm sure there is, but I don't know what the reference manuals say for clearance height for roadways. But I do feel like 8 foot for sidewalk is adequate. And I think for a litany of reasons, we need to probably shoot for 16 feet. Or I'm sorry, 15 feet for all of our streets. And then maybe to where we trim to a higher standard, kind of like consumers, where we allow that, knowing that we're not going to be able to trim every tree to the extent that we want to. When we come through, we're trimming up higher and set our clearances for a lower regulated height. But that's one of the things I'm gonna do some digging on and make a proposal later for. Deb, do y'all have any guidance on that? I mean, I don't know. Y'all have some lines that cross across roadways.
I for the city, I'm thinking that you're looking at your plow trucks. So you have a minimum overhang clearance of a sidewalk where people walk. So people are going up and down there, and then you have snow blowers and that's why they have 8 foot over the sidewalk is acceptable. And you're looking at 15 feet on just your streets because you want to get your snow plows down there. And then the reason why your major thoroughfares are 16 feet is because you have wide load semis coming through.
Mm-hmm.
So you're looking at what type of traffic is on your right of ways.
Sure.
So is 8 foot over a sidewalk acceptable? I mean, most people aren't over, hardly get close to 8 foot tall. I can't think of anything that would be over 8 foot that would be going down a sidewalk. And then I think your 15 foot is really what they wanted for your streets. I think that's what they're saying is your snow plows, your garbage trucks, all of your vehicles could get through on a 15 foot overhang. But I'm thinking major thoroughfares, because you guys kind of take over some of the state roads. So like if you have a road that's M43 that's under your jurisdiction instead of the state right now, or any of those M roads that you're taking over from the state that are still state roads, the state's probably saying they want 16 foot or probably wider.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just because of the type of vehicles that can use those roads.
Absolutely.
So you know that you worked at DOT before, probably in Mississippi, since you referred to it. But that's probably why you're wanting 16 foot. But I mean, really, when you're looking at a city, do you really need more than 16 foot on your thoroughfares?
No,
I mean, have your plows changed? Because I know like the state plows are like monster huge now.
well, everything is getting bigger for sure, but I think as an ordinance, I would prefer to lower that clearance height And then from a maintenance standpoint, when we come through and we're doing trimming, we trim to a much or a couple of feet higher. We're not trimming to 15 feet. We're trimming to 16 or 17 feet, anticipating that over time limbs could grow and come back down. Similar to Consumers Program.
Oh, yeah, yeah, directional pruning.
Yeah, so I'd like to look at that, and I'll probably include that in a list of edits. This right here, talking about what property owners can and cannot maintain, this describes hedges and trees that fall into city right of way. I don't know necessarily that needs to change. But one thing that I have seen throughout the city is plantings in curb lawn space or at street corners that they're not trees or possibly even shrubs, but they're planting wildflowers or other types of plantings that could hinder sight distance for vehicles. And I'd really like to address that in this. We've had, it looks nice and it's not a problem until it's blocking sight distance for somebody turning, and then
Okay,
that's
yeah.
a liability that the city really needs to consider.
So a lot of those decorative grasses that people plant would get to a height so you may want to put a height, so no person shall maintain any tree, shrub, hedge, or other vegetation which interferes with the clear view of traffic. Well, that's already covered. So if it's interfering with the clear view of traffic, the city has the right to remove it.
Yeah, but I didn't know if we should go as far to list an actual height. Is it 3 feet? Is it 2.5 feet? I think you start getting 3 foot. That's about the driver height, or where you're starting to get into some blocking of sight distance. So that would be something that might need more revisiting to it.
Yeah, I know the county has a distance that it's just a distance to the stop sign or a distance to the intersection that has to be clear.
Mm-hmm.
Anything, and what they're not worried about, like limbs that are above coming from private property in there if it's got the certain height, but
Yeah.
this is, so it says no property owner shall at a greater than 3 foot above the surface of the street. So it's already got 3 foot in there. You can't put anything over 3 foot within 25 feet from the intersection. Right? Is that what's supposed to be from the street right away line?
Yeah. Yep. I think so.
Determined by the city traffic engineer at an intersection corner. So what is your city visual clearance currently? Is it
It's
25 feet?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I think the county's 500 feet.
Yeah, we wouldn't have any vegetation at all if that was the case.
I mean, you also have lower speed limits too. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm not quite understanding this. So it says street corner clearances, no property owner shall maintain anything that's over 3 foot high and within 25 foot. And if they but then it's saying failure to prune, but pruning is maintaining.
Mm-hmm.
So we're saying that you shall not maintain anything on your property, but then we're telling you that if you're not pruning it, which is maintaining it, you're going to get a written notice, and then you have 21 days to maintain it. Is that how I'm reading this?
Yeah, and I think kind of like we were saying, I think the intent is to not have anything above 3 feet. But the way that's worded is it doesn't, it's not very clear.
No, I would think that the first part is okay, nothing over 3 feet within 25 foot. And then if you have something that's interfering, that you'll receive notice, and you have so many days upon receiving the written notice to remove the vegetation, not prune it.
Right. Yeah. So probably just could clean that up a little bit. I mean, it's not a huge overhaul, but I do think there is some things that can be cleaned up. I know one of the things we talked about talks about public works director versus, now we have a public services director. Yeah, director of the public works department. That, that's named a few times. And then this here talks about, private vegetation physically obstructing or overhanging into public right of way, the city's right to do that.
So one of the things, Anthony, that I kind of note in this ordinance, there's a lot of things in here that says written notice, like, but do we have things that we put in writing, like, when we talked about that you're going to plant trees and we say, yeah, that's fine. Is there anything that we put in writing to give to them that says, you're going to plant these 5 trees within, 365 days? And these are the agreed to. And I mean, who does the abuse or mutilation of the tree? Do you have a,
Well, in the
that-
past, it's been the forestry supervisor, really, that's handled a lot of that enforcement. And if it ever gets to the point where we're actually issuing a physical ticket, that is done by our right-of-way coordinator that
Okay.
has the ability to do that. But that's kind of one of the, I mean, this ordinance language, needs to be revised, but also internally, how the city processes those things. We've talked about trying to come up with a better way or revisiting some of the decisions that are made by the committee to follow
Right.
up with people to make sure these things are getting done.
Right. And it helps to have something on writing. And of course, in today's day and age, it's not that hard to have things online that can be kept in a database numbered
Right.
too.
And a lot of times I know that, the private citizen ones might not get as followed up on as the new construction or trees that are removed for new buildings to be made. I'm watching those as they come through pre-site plan, and then once construction starts, making sure that either trees are being protected or trees are being removed. And that's something that I've been doing, but ultimately we want to have that written record where that's been decided, that they've been issued, that declaration, and to where somebody between myself and Brian and the right-of-way coordinator or their designee can follow up on those things to make sure, like the placement of materials using, the canopy of trees for storage. That's something that in the past we were really good at watching and staying on top of. But I think through all the turnover we've had, we haven't been watching as closely as we should have.
Yeah.
And that's, half turnover, half, shortage of people, even though we know what to look for, but that's something that we need to do a better job of internally.
Yeah, so you're on the trenching, which I know can cause some big concerns when you guys do sidewalks with residents.
Yeah, and I will
We
say,
bore.
sure,
I mean, we have a standard that we follow through, you were talking about the printing standards. So we follow ANSI printing A300 standards. And so when we're going to do underground lines, if we're so many feet within a power line, a crown of the tree, we have a formula, then we have to bore. So we don't trench, we bore.
absolutely.
But you guys can't do that for a sidewalk because you're not.
No, but one of the things that Brian has been working on with our engineering staff is to come up with a detail or recommendation to actually try to go over and still maintain ADA compliance. That's one of the things that we're doing to try to shift that way of thinking to where it's just, well, the sidewalk's got to go here. Let's go through some routes. We're going to try to do a better job, make a better effort to preserve those trees.
Yeah, I don't even know why they have 15 days in there, because a lot of times if you got that much sand or stone, you've suffocated the trees within 15 days. They're not alive. It takes them a while to die, but so this is one of the things when we get down to the next one where it says overhead tree pruning by utilities.
Sure.
It says that unless our storm, which is the act of God, constitutes an emergency. But it says non-emergency trimming of trees by the utility company shall provide written notice. I think we generally email you, but there used to be, I believe, and of course, I hadn't been on the tree committee for many years, probably since the 90s. I thought there used to be some type of notice that the utility had to fill out for the engineering department when they were going to be doing construction, where they had to give you 15-day advance notify, like, if they're putting in new lines or changing poles from 35s to 55s, or, from 55s to 35s, or that's impacting trees.
Now, I mean, we get right-of-way permits, that works through that. Any kind of work, at least since I've been here, all that work has been tracked through right-of-way permit.
So when they're enhancing or rehabilitating an existing system, just like you guys do on your roads and sidewalks, you have a rehabilitation program, kind of maintenance program on. When our company does that, they're also getting a right-of-way permit, or are they just doing that for new stuff?
No, it's for any reason. It's not just for new construction.
All right. And so are they putting trees in that advance notice, and are you getting a copy of that from right away?
The only real tree work that I've received notice from was the project in the Winchell neighborhood and the Westnedge Hill. I mean, coming down Whites through that project.
Well, I think the gas department, because you got to realize consumers is joint gas and electric.
Sure.
I think the gas department also did some there on Cork Street by the park where they had a gas main going in.
Yeah. Otherwise, they're not letting us know if trees are affected. No. But to my knowledge too, since we, since I've been involved, I have not seen any damages done that were outside of what was already scoped out to take place.
No, I mean, Brian and I are pretty good about telling our company that they have to notify you or getting notification to you
Let's appreciate it.
because we're the foresters, so we're going to have to do the tree work.
Sure.
And so when we see the tree work, we're the ones who kind of say, no, we gotta do this before you can just release this job and go. So
It's appreciated. Yeah, and we have these line clearances, which again, I think that probably just needs to be, I mean, we could leave it in there, but it doesn't really amount to a whole lot. And, here where it lists topping, I mean, we won't do that. That doesn't really stop consumers from doing that. I know that you won't, but still.
we can't say that 100% of the time we're not going to do that.
Sure.
Sometimes just because of the species, the type of wire, and maybe the sentiment of the tree causes us to do something like that, which we normally wouldn't want to do because of the severe damage, but it's just prudent to do that.
Absolutely. Here we have the list of reasons. Oh, that's not gonna work. For removal of a tree. I think a lot of times we don't maybe reference this list as much as we should. I don't know if and maybe that might be something 90% dead, if that's, I don't know what a good percentage of dead would be, but constitute a public hazard, that's good. Disease, planted too close together, where necessary for public streets or infrastructure. We've had, a lot of infrastructure here lately. Here we're talking about sidewalk and routes. And then this is another one that's listed that we get a lot of complaints on. Trees shall not be removed for the sole reason that they clog sewers. We go out and assess the best we can, but this really should be something we refer to as requests are coming in for the monthly meetings.
Yeah, I guess when we had the last tree, it really didn't fall within the ordinance. It wasn't 90% dead. It wasn't really a public hazard. It wasn't diseased. It wasn't planted too close to anything else.
Which tree was that?
In the historic
Stewart.
neighborhood. Yeah, Stewart. Yeah.
Well, and I think that was, without directly referring to that, I think that was really the point that we were trying to, as a committee, trying to convey.
But the thing of it is you almost, I don't know. I almost want to say that that even if this has to happen and the resident's going to take it down, that they have to have the tree assessed and pay the city the assessed value of the tree
So
plus pay the removal costs.
I think that's one thing that, or probably the number one thing that needs to be addressed in this entire document. We start talking down here about permitting, about what necessitates needing a permit, which is planting, removal, trimming, spraying. Talks about enforcement, the ticket writing ability, like we talked about. But there's nothing in this document that really outlines what the tree committee can assess. It says that any tree that needs to be removed has to have tree committee approval, but it doesn't really speak to any reimbursement for loss from the city. And I think that's one glaring, if it's not going to be completely spelled out as to what that means, we
Right.
need some guidance in there.
Right. I agree with you. There needs to be something in there.
But, outside of that, there is a lot of things in here that I think sometimes during tree committee, we don't necessarily refer to when we should. And because we're making it hard on ourselves if we don't rely on this document to, let's get this ordinance to the place where we can use it and reliably, look to it for reference and guidance.
All right. Do you think there's benefit to getting potentially the city attorney involved for what legally can and can happen?
So once we draft language that we would like to see on here, anything like this ordinance wise, I mean, it has to have city attorney approval before it even goes to commission. So they're certainly in the queue, of approvals. But what I would suggest is, let's try to draft something the way we want it to be written or stated, and then we can rely on city attorney's office to kind of guide us or let us know if we're in the means of, our abilities.
All right. Do you want each of us to take like a section
Well,
and come up with something? And then if everybody likes it, that's fine. If not, then somebody else goes back and tackles it. How would you like to do it?
I mean, well, I just know that there's a few things that I'd like to comment on kind of each and every one of them, but we could probably figure out some sort of split like that.
I'm just, each one of us has a
Just a section.
well, more of a specialized, we
Sure.
understand that specialty a little bit better. I'm not real sure about streets. I mean, I'd have to go in and really look to see if there's some kind of state or federal regulation on clearances for certain types of vehicles. That's not my forte.
Right. Yeah, I think that would be a good thing to do, and maybe that way we, I'm not gonna say force members for feedback, but it certainly encourages participation.
I
We
mean,
could do something like that.
you talked about things out. I mean, it doesn't really refer to anything outside of the right of way. Does it say anything about city property at all? Because a lot of the things that we've been making decisions on with MDOT and consumers and all that is city property,
Right.
not right of way, just property that's owned by the city.
Yeah, and I don't know if, Parks and Recreation, if they have a separate document or if they would like to have their own kind of subsection to this in this
Well,
document. Help
yeah.
them.
That's why I was like, go through it and kind of look at if that really pertains to parks, um, you know, tree species or whatever, if there's something that needs to be added for the other committee, I forget, is their name, who's, what's her name?
Jamie.
Gail.
Oh.
I'm sorry, I had to
Oh,
switch screens and now I just lost you all. Um, oh, good Lord, I lost everybody here. Let me see. I mean,
I can still hear you. I don't know if that.
I know. All right. All right. Am I still on or what?
yeah.
Okay.
Still talking.
Now
I can
I've got
hear you.
double things going. Somehow I messed up the whole thing and I got a baby crying in the background here. Good luck to my husband.
Well, and I was going to say, I need to, I made this for an hour and I really do need to get off here, but, yeah, I mean, I think part of that too is talking with the Parks and Rec Advisory Group, the Environmental Concerns Committee. I think the two big things that could really use some serious guidance is what abilities the tree committee has for reimbursement for tree canopy lost, and then also looking at membership, how membership to the committee is handled, whether it's just a representative for each group, if there's other groups that need to be involved. Just kind of taking a look at that too. But I agree, Deb. I will follow up with some emails and maybe give out some homework, some suggestive homework, in hopes that we can get input. I think that's a good idea to have each person kind of speak to their specialty or why they have a seat at the table to begin with, and we'll go from there.
Just one quick thing. The thing I really want, or even to be looked at or discussed, is having tree valuation in there somewhere. Maybe, I don't know how or which way we decide, because I've got to go over it. But I also want beefed up the fines for destruction, or at least the fines for destruction, meaning it goes back to the tree valuation with some kind of language as well, because as you can imagine, if someone removes like a 40-inch tree in the street, that was a $250, whatever, there was $500 fine. That's totally not acceptable.
Or 90 days in jail.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
not
because you could have felony charges on those trees. I mean, especially if you've got a historic tree or something like that. I agree with you that there needs to be something in there.
as well. There's nothing in the. I don't think there's anything called a historic tree. There's no language about historic trees in the.
Right.
Which would be a cool thing to have for a multitude of reasons.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I mean, legally, like if you're going to go to court, legally, the only thing you can stand on is the evaluation of a tree by a certified arborist. Both sides have one. I've gone to court before, and you have to have those credentials. And it really comes down to, that professional coming up with the true valuation. And I agree with you. It needs to be in there just as it's a great legal thing.
Well, I just don't like the fact that you could remove a tree for, what was it, $500, and it could be, like I said, that tree could be worth a lot of money to a lot of people.
Yeah. I haven't had a chance to read through, this whole ordinance yet, but, some of the things that I was curious whether it would be included or could be included is, are we starting to address like an ideal tree canopy percentage for the city or for neighborhoods, and what is the tree replacement rate? Like if one tree is taken out, how many more trees would be put in, and how is all of that funded? And really too, I agree, like how does this tie in with Parks and Recs, and to address tree plantings that are, outside of the street trees. So yeah, I think there's a lot of potential for, expanding this a bit.
Absolutely. I mean, it's, I hate to build momentum and then, have it drop off again. Of course, I think COVID's a pretty good, excuse for why this happened. But you can see, just reviewing this as quickly as we did, there's a lot of areas that could benefit from revisiting. So I appreciate everybody's time. I'm going to get off here, but you can look to me sending out some emails in the very near future. Like I said, some homework, and we will pick this up back up again. And if nothing else, I really want to try to have a spring working meeting. But I think in the meantime, we can have just an exchange of emails and kind of, what do you think about this? What does this look like? Take all of that comment from committee members and then kind of have a meeting to bring us all back and review it line by line again. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
There we go.